Welcome to the first Plant Lovers Tour of 2021. Tim is laughing at the new name. Chris has already told you what the topic is today. And as always, we'll get distracted now and then by particular plants of interest. And indeed, standing here for a few minutes before this show got on the road, we noticed the beautiful branching habit of the Korean mimosa, Albizia koreana. This is one of the rarest plants in the Arboretum. It's endangered in the wild because the common Albizia, Albizia julibrisson, has been introduced into Korea, and the two different species hybridized. So there's very few pure Albizia koreana seedlings in the wild. It has white flowers. You see, it's a very much taller tree than the common Albizia. It does make fruit. This is, a seed pod from it. Many plants do not set a lot of viable seed. If they are growing by themselves, they need to be cross-pollinated. It's Mother Nature's way of preventing inbreeding. You think of apples, where if you plant just one apple variety, you don't get much fruits in it. And so this seed pod has no seeds in it. And when we do get seeds, there's always the possibility that they are the result of this species being pollinated by the common Albizia. The tree is highly favored by pollinators, including hummingbirds, and you think how far hummingbirds will fly. They can readily bring pollen from other species of mimosa to this tree. But I hope you got a chance to see how the branches have very angular turns to the branches, a lot of zigzags. It's a really fascinating growth habit. If winter's not your favorite season, I urge you to go outside and just enjoy the architecture of the trees that are leafless at this time of year. It's real beautiful here, set out against the silvery sky. But back to the topic of the tour today. J.C. Ralston graduated from Texas A&M and came here in 1975. In 1976, he started planting the Arboretum. And we're standing here at the entrance to the White Garden because this was the original entrance to the Arboretum. You entered from Burrell Road as you do nowadays, but the original entrance was down here near the White Garden. The parking lot was actually right outside the White Garden. It's now lawn and planting beds. So we're not going to go through the White Garden, but we're going to go through the old northeast quadrant, which is one of the places where JC first started doing plantings. In 1976, the Arboretum was smaller than it is now. It grew as several additional parcels were added over the years. But this is where some of the oldest plantings are. One of the most notable plants at the Arboretum is this columnar English oak, which is Quercus robar fastigiata. It was a gift to JC when he, from his, I guess, fellow students and such at Texas A&M when he came to the Arboretum. So one of the first plants he planted here. It's now in serious decline. Probably doesn't have that many more years. But years ago, it used to make acorns, and a high percentage of the seedlings would exhibit the same fastigiate growth. I haven't seen any acorns on it in recent years. this cultivar of English oak, the columnar English oak, has been used in breeding programs, breeding with other species of oak. And we'll probably see one example of a hybrid later on this tour. The columnar English oak grows okay here. The foliage does tend to suffer from powdery mildew during the humid, hot parts of the summer. So it's not, you know, the top rate plant. It's an okay plant for this area, but some of the hybrids are really great improvements on this parent.
We had a question as, has this been propagated for replacement? Well, Quercus robur fastigiata is actually quite available. So it's really, it's not hard finding them. And actually, I believe the original plant, if I remember right, was found by Napoleon's army.
Oh,
and I think in somewhere in Germany, I think, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but they were clearing the forest of all the woods, you know, taking everything away that they can clear, you know, make useful and take it away from the people living there, I think, for the war machine. And they found this upright oak and they left it because they thought it was something significant. And it's, I guess it's still there from what I've been told other times. So yeah, it's not, this isn't the end of this one, even though it might be the end of it for us someday soon.
If we were to try to propagate this oak vegetatively, it would have to be grafted roots, rarely root from stem cuttings. I wish it would just make a few acorns and then we could raise it that way.
And they were asking the genus and species again. It's Quercus robur, R-O-B-A-R.
You are.
Or you are? Okay, robur. Fastigiata.
We might step back here and look at this.
Yeah, I can get the sign here, actually. Oh, going back in there for some stuff too.
JC was very fond of the winter flowering apricot, which is Prunus mume, M-U-M-E. This is cultivar Togibai, T-O-G-I-B-A-I. This is a wild type single 5-petaled flowers. Most of the named cultivars that are grown as ornamentals have bigger, many-petaled flowers. Some of them are even fully double. I have wondered, though I wasn't able to find any information on this cultivar, if it's one that's grown for its fruit, because the pickled plums you get in Japanese restaurants are made from the fruiting selections of Prunus mume. They're very fragrant. They may have a large number of buds. And so these open flowers can get destroyed by a cold spell, but the unopened buds will open the next time we have a mild spell. These are not being super early because the earliest ones often start blooming before Christmas.
I think a few years ago, I actually missed them. I went home to Western Pennsylvania and they weren't flowering when I left, and we had a warm spell, and they were done before I got back, the first of the year. They're really tolerant of cold, though. I've noticed them being fine down into the upper teens without flower damage.
Yeah, this is Bonita, which is a dark pink. Soon will be out if the weather remains mild. So we stopped at this plant a month ago, the winter flowering honeysuckle, our first breath of spring. And as we mentioned in December, once it starts blooming, it usually blooms the rest of the winter into March. And the fragrance is absolutely delightful.
Human dog, which one was that? I know there's...
That was Percussion.
Okay.
I think winter beauty, if I remember
Winter
correct.
beauty.
And actually right now I'm standing next to Fragrantissima, which is one of the parents of the Propusii.
They're almost indistinguishable. Oh, I know. I should make some general comments now. We've now sort of officially entered into this part of the Arboretum. As we go along, you will notice that a lot of the areas are very wet. Whenever we have a wet spell, it's an area that stays wet, especially in the wintertime. Also, as the oldest part of the Arboretum, now, 40 some years old, it's time to evaluate the plants growing here. There's some that certainly we would want to retain, but there's others that maybe it's sort of been there, done that. We've grown them, we've made an evaluation of them. Perhaps they're not something that we want to promote because they're not particularly ornamental, or they're not particularly well suited to this area, or they are already very widely accepted in the green industry and in landscapes and gardens. So several things are going on. Planning a system of all-weather paths so people can walk through this area without slipping in the mud, and we can bring in garden vehicles to do all the maintenance work that's required. But also, as we get into the lower corner of this part of the Arboretum, it's likely that a pond will be constructed to capture runoff. So the water that would normally pass from the Arboretum out into the road is captured here on the Arboretum, and in time will, have time to percolate down through the soil into the water table rather than going into the storm drain and out into the Atlantic Ocean. So we want to improve the pathway system through here and be more responsible landowners and deal with the runoff that comes off from the higher part of the Arboretum, and renovate the plant collection as well. There are some older collections here in the Arboretum. The Arboretum has a large collection of Andinas, and originally located in this area. And like so many plant collections at the Arboretum, the plants in that, the plant that's been collected, newer additions have been scattered here and there through the Arboretum. This was the original location of a witch hazel collection, and there's still some good examples here. Hemlock vernalis, the Ozark witch hazel, is starting to bloom with its little orangey flowers. They're not out in full yet, so they get bigger than that. And it's one that's very fragrant. A notable selection of the same species, the Ozark witch hazel, is this dwarf one, Quasimodo. Witch hazels eventually get, 8, 9, 10 feet tall. So for a smaller garden, you can have the fragrance of the Ozark witch hazel in a much smaller plant. One very large tree is this plant of the Chinese elm, Ulmus parviflora. It's a selection called Frosty. The foliage is variegated, so it's now gotten so tall that it's hard to notice the variegation on the foliage. Is it brighter in the spring or
I don't. All I ever notice is the serration on the leaves being white, and it's very subtle. You can tell it also the almost parvifloras or folias. I can never remember which it is. Would you say folia or flora?
Parviflora.
Parviflora. It's small something. Anyways, they sell so prolifically, and so they are somewhat a little bit weedy. And I can tell the seedlings of these are often have the same variegation as the mother plant.
Jim and Doug?
Yes.
Parvifolia, per the records.
Folia? Okay, good.
You can notice the beautiful bark on the tree.
That gives it its other common name, lacebark elm. Oops, I'm walking on the daffodils.
I like the flared roots on it quite a bit. It's one of my favorites in the Arboretum for that trait.
Yeah, the roots are, the buttress roots are quite amazing.
And I didn't realize how big this has gotten. Looking at this with Doug standing there.
Yeah, it's a big tree. And, you know, would have been planted by JC, so at most it's about 40 years old. And I'm sure it wasn't brought in as a great big specimen. 40 years is a pretty long time for a lot of woody plants. In the background, this evergreen tree is one of the many evergreen oaks at the Arboretum. This is Quercus polymorpha. You know, polymorpha meaning many bodies. I'm sure a more accurate translation would be many shapes. I don't see a lot of variation in the leaf shape, but it's a species of oak native to Mexico.
If we get below 15, it often goes deciduous, but until then, it's been evergreen. It's up to you, but I see what we need to highlight. I see something else we need to highlight.
Wintersweet? Yeah, yeah. There are many selections of Ilex cornuta, the thorn holly native to China. You know, the most common selections of Ilex cornuta that most of you would know are Burford and Dwarf Burford, but this is a lovely variegated one called O Spring. It's O apostrophe Spring. And it's really, for an Ilex cornuta, it's pretty harmless. Some of the wild types Ilex cornuta are just as sharply pointed as can be.
JC's selection, it's out in the east. Autumn Fire, I think. It is mean.
Well, the ones down in the corner?
Those two, but this is one over here. It's actually named. That one, those aren't named. Those are over there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's near the necessary.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
It's mean.
Yeah. Again, a shrub we saw a month ago when it was just starting is now in full bloom. The winter sweet, Chimonanthus praecox. Tim holds it up close, maybe you can smell it. The translucent yellow flowers and very fragrant. It's quite chilly today, so I don't smell it on the air. I can smell it when I stick my nose in it.
It's a good COVID test.
Yeah. It's very closely related to Calycanthus, the Carolina allspice or sweet Betsy or sweet Bubbies. It's deciduous, but maybe because winter's been fairly mild, it's being slow and shedding its leaves this year. This is the cultivar luteus. A wild type winter sweet's flowers are almost the color of watered down milk. Luteus was selected for its strongly pigmented flowers. They're very yellow. It's generally propagated by grafting. I think you can see the big grafting down at ground level. It's plant that's hard to root. We have some seedlings of it from seed collected last year, but they might not, their flowers might not be as well colored as the parent here.
Before Doug begins with this one, I have a little factoid that I thought was always fun, or a little question for everyone. Which state has more native palms, California or North Carolina? Anyone have an idea on that one?
Does California have that few? What?
According to the palm guy out on the coast,
North Carolina.
North Carolina has twice as many native palms than California does.
Yeah,
Right.
Washingtonia is native to California.
And by the way, we have two native palms.
Yeah, and the sable, minor, and palmetto are the two species native to North Carolina.
Yeah, and we are standing in front of a palm that is native to the southeast U.S., but it is not native to North Carolina. It is the needle palm. Tim will probably go into the center of the tree and show you the great big long needles. They're pretty ferocious. You know, that's almost 6 inches long, I think.
Maybe 8 sometimes.
And I have never, ever seen one anywhere near this size. Typically, they're more, you know, like 4 or 5 feet tall and wide. It does develop a trunk, a very compact trunk. It certainly doesn't mind the wet soil that it's living in right now, and will grow equally well in sun or shade. It's considered the most cold hardy of all palms. I think they even grow it in the Washington, D.C. area.
I'm on a palm or a tropical forum on Facebook, and they grow these all over.
Do they?
Yeah.
It's an amazing plant for the size it's developed in this time. There's no record of exactly when it was planted, but it was thought that JC did plant it.
There's some pictures of it when it was rather small with snow in the collection.
Did you want to go in?
Oh, I can dive in maybe, and let's see what happens.
Hopefully he'll return.
Let's see if we can see this. And actually, I can see there's spent inflorescence here. They kind of look like cauliflower that's spoiled. And supposedly they're dioecious, but there are occasionally fruit, and we only have one. I think this is a female, but I don't see any right now. But I've never had any that were viable. I've never had a seedling here in the garden that I've seen. But, again, here's the needle, which Doug only got part of one. I have one here that's probably 14 or 15 inches long. So it is a pretty cool thing.
And it's quite rare in the wild, partly through habitat destruction and over collecting of plants from the wild for gardens, and it's also fairly slow from seed. We have its label here.
Yeah, I think is it South Carolina to Alabama or something, or Mississippi?
Yeah.
Yeah, South Carolina to Florida to Mississippi.
Yeah, I've seen it in the wild in Georgia, and there it was growing in soil that had a lot of limestone rock in it, but I don't know that it needs it. And its name, Rapidophyllum, I think it's referring to leaf like rhapis, which is a common lady palm, one that's grown as a houseplant. And hystrix always seems to be applied to plants that are spiny. We saw the needles on it. The Ralston Arboretum is known for its very large collection of cultivars of Japanese maple. But I think a more notable collection is just all the different species, other species of maples. And Lord,
This is a blungum, if I remember correctly. And I forget where we got the seed for this one. It's tardily deciduous.
yeah,
And there are true evergreen forms of this, there are, but
yeah.
they tend to, we've had them in the past and they tend to not make it here. They freeze back every year. Well, this has gotten enormous.
This is a lovely example where I'm sure that's probably
It's a collection.
no, it's common name in China.
Oh,
Flying moth maple, isn't that a wonderful name? You know, instead of obviously it's would originally have been in Chinese and not English, but the fact that someone took the time to translate the Chinese common name for it rather than giving it a, you know, an American name or an English name.
It's certainly a lot more fun name than oblong leaf maple.
which was she referring to about growing from seed? The palm or something else?
My guess is Marianne was asking about growing that maple.
The Acer. I think we received the Acer. I'm guessing it was a seed, but I could be wrong. We didn't grow this intentionally, though. It was wild collected seed. Whether we grew it or we were given plants, I don't know offhand. I'd have to look in the records. But it's been here for quite some time. And there's another one, I think, from the same. Yeah, there was. Yeah. I think there's another one from the same collection, maybe out near the Contemplation Garden. I think it is. There's another oblonga out there anyways.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same collection.
This is a hardy citrus. I think all the citrus are native to Asia. This is Citrus cavalierii. I'm guessing named for a Frenchman with the family name of Cavalieri. Tim, I don't remember ever seeing fruit on
It
this one.
occasionally gets fruit. They've never been full. They're always just hollow to me and deflated almost in green. They've never changed colors. I always think this one's just cool because the shape of the leaf, including the petiole, because the petiole on this, the leaf petiole is right there. And then this is the leaf blade on this end. So it kind of looks like an hourglass. So this is the leaf stem. And here's what a part of it there, but the extension of that, and then you have the actual leaf on the tip.
The Conifer lime leaf that's used in Southeast Asian cooking has a similarly shaped leaf. And I wondered if this might have the same fragrance, but there's no fragrance to this foliage. Some of the hybrids between the trifoliate orange and true citrus have very much that same fragrance as Conifer lime. But this one I get pretty much no fragrance at all. I've noticed there's a few flower buds.
Yeah, it does flower. I can't remember if it's actually a decent fragrance or not.
Yeah.
I can actually see the flowers and buds, and I don't even have my glasses on.
It wasn't that many decades ago that we became aware that not all dogwoods are deciduous. This is an evergreen dogwood. It's Cornus capitata, an Asian species. The leaf looked very much like other dogwood foliage with the arcuate veins through it, but maybe more obvious on the backside of the leaf. And the flower buds look very much like the flower buds on Cornus florida. What?
More like Kusa.
Okay.
To me.
And it has, yeah, the flowers are very much like Cornus Kusa, the four bracts with the pointed tips rather than the blunt notch tip of Florida. but it's one of a number of evergreen dogwoods.
We're getting into the hip waiter area. If I fall over, you'll know why.
Yeah, I'm glad I have you. We have a small collection here of Lindera, a genus named for somebody with the family name of Linder, Linder. We have one or two species of Lindera native to the eastern part of North America. The common one is the spice bush. Is that the common name for it?
Yeah, that's what most of them are called.
Benzoin.
Yeah.
But these are all Asian species, and a number of them, these are two different species, a number of them retain their dead foliage through the winter months. It's a look that you might not like. I enjoy it. It's another, there goes the train. You know, this brown foliage is another element of the winter landscape. I certainly love seeing our native beaches and woodlands where the lower parts of the trees retain their parchment tan foliage through the winter months. One of our native swallowtail butterflies is the spice bush swallowtail, and the larvae only feed on the foliage of our native spice bush. Tim has confirmed my suspicion that we never see that caterpillar on these Asian ones. So I'd be thrilled if they'd make use of it.
I actually did see one time, did the variegated one, and it's now next to Marlene's office. I did that.
Oh, that real pretty one.
Yeah, it had one caterpillar on it one year. That's the only time I've ever seen a caterpillar of one.
Yeah, we certainly have no end of pipe vine swallowtails on our pipe vines. You know, so I thought maybe the spice bush caterpillars would find these spice bushes, but they haven't. I don't remember. Well,
I wanted to say, going back to the foliage on how they hold on these, when the wind comes through them in the winter, I just like the sound of the rustling of the leaves through the wind through the leaves that are holding on. It's just another aspect that you don't think about so much as the sound of plants.
The sound of winter, that and the twittering of the little birds scratching about in the leaf litter on the ground. And a number of these have really beautiful fall color, red and yellow and orange.
Yeah, these are
before
spectacular.
They turn brown.
Doug and Tim?
Yep.
Is a native one Lindera benzoin?
Yes.
Okay, and the one you're near right now, is that Lindera salicifolia?
Yes, and
One of them is.
Yeah, one of them is. There's two here, and I think the other is supposedly umbellata, I think, or something like that. They look the same to me.
Yeah, this is labeled umbellata, and that's salicifolia, and there's a number of others in this area. There's a third one that does not retain its foliage. So I agree with Tim that these two look very, very similar, but maybe they're different.
And then there's angustifolia too, which looks just the same to me.
And,
I've used the dried fruit for cooking. It's like a little peppercorn.
We have one of our summer interns who's been working for us this fall still. And in winter, this is Block and saying what you were saying.
I've used the dried fruit for like Indian cooking and stuff. Treat it like a little peppercorn. They're really tiny, but yeah. I've used that from, I think I collected them from these and the native Lindera benzoin.
Doug and Tim, going back to some dogwood questions that we just got. It was Marilyn. She asked, what was that venation pattern that Doug mentioned in dogwood? I'm forgetting right now.
Arcuate, A-R-C-U-A-T-E, arcuate, those veins that are arching up there. I think I have that leaf in my, I do have that leaf in my pocket still. See how the veins all have that same
Yep.
arc pattern? That's typical of cornice.
Yes, they have a very unique venation.
Yeah.
And Paul asked if you can recommend a evergreen dogwood for southeastern part of the state other than Empress of China.
I have seen Empress of China grow well for a while and then develop like lesions on the trunk, and then stems will die. The whole plant doesn't die all at once, but trunks will die and it'll continue to grow. The Hong Kongensis is a very similar species. We have a really nice plant of that in Lath House. It's a selection named Gekku, not like the lizard gecko, but Gekku, Gekkou, and it's Hong Kongensis. Again, that ensis ending, that suffix always meaning from, so that's a species from Hong Kong.
It's done very well here. Unfortunately, it's gotten a little big for the Lath House. We have some ones to replace it because we're going to have to get, it's too big to move.
Yeah. Tim, I want to turn around and
Sure.
point out these grasses again. Yeah, I don't need to be in the picture, but this is a selection of our native switchgrass, Panicum virgatum. It's one that's on trial and hasn't been named yet. And I'm not blathering about this so much to talk about this particular selection or even the species, but just the beauty in the winter garden where the winter forms of things of herbaceous perennials are contrasted against the evergreen. Behind the panicum is a selection of the tea olive, Osmanthus fragrans. You can see how big some of the robust forms of Osmanthus fragrans get. And to the right of the grass is the oak we saw a moment ago, the Quercus polymorpha. And wintertime is a time to really enjoy the forms of some of the deciduous plants. This is the weeping form of what we used to know as Sephora, Sephora japonica, which is the Chinese scholar tree or the Japanese pagoda tree. It's now in the genus
Styptinolobium?
Yeah, Symphinolobium, a little bit more cumbersome than Sephora, but Tim will highlight I think the form of weeping plants is much more dramatic in the winter than when they're covered in green. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The sweetheart tree, the Eucaphus japonica, is a plant that JC promoted. The plant in fruit always reminds me of a euonymus. You have the rosy reddish fruit which split open and then the orangish seeds dangle out. But I just noticed these really gnarly twigs are sort of like the spurs on an apple tree, the short congested branches that bear the fruit, but many times more pronounced than on an apple tree. But an aspect of the tree that's more evident this time of year than in the winter, in the summer. A very beautiful weeping form of the European hornbeam, Carpinus betulus. A much more dramatic weeping carpinus than the selection of our native one, which only sort of tardily develops the weeping habit after the plant is grown up. But this is very, very dramatic all winter long.
Who found the native one?
Oh, I don't know. In this part of the Arboretum are quite a few different Buckeyes. Aeschylus, this is Aeschylus glabra. The well, I see the label is calling it Texas Buckeye. I think it's also native to the Midwest as well.
I think that's the variety glabra is the
Oh, okay.
it's the difference.
And this flowers are I would say close to being yellow.
This is a yellowy green.
Yeah, it's very showy in bloom. The flower color is very similar to our local native, which is a much smaller plant, more of a shrub. This is a pretty good sized tree. Of course, maybe the most colorful one is the Aeschylus pavia, the red Buckeye, which is not native to North Carolina, but native further south in Alabama and Georgia. And they're showy ornamentals, but they're also good trees for hummingbirds because they're in bloom about the time that they first return to this area.
Yeah, this one is Aeschylus. I don't know if you probably can't see that. It's Aeschylus glabra variety arguta.
Yeah.
And then the red Buckeye would be Aeschylus pavia. And the native one that Doug was mentioning, which is a shrubby one, is I think is it Sylvatica? Yeah. And you'll see it in the woods here around Raleigh.
And it's one of the first woody plants in our native woodlands to leaf out in the spring, long before other things do, and it stands out.
And they quickly go dormant in the summer. They get everything done early.
We have the Arboretum at times has had an extensive collection of wisteria cultivars. Now the largest number of cultivars are selections of our two native species, Wisteria macrostachya and Wisteria floribunda.
I think frutescens.
Frutescens, that's right. Yeah. And behind them, you see a number of crepe myrtles, and over here as well. This is an older part of the crepe myrtle collection. There's so much crepe myrtle breeding going on nowadays that I think probably a lot of the newer things are superior to these older cultivars. When we started this tour today, we were looking at the fastigiate English oak that JC planted, and I mentioned some hybrids, using that as a parent for the fastigiate growth habit. This is one of the best. This cultivar name is Long, L-O-N-G. I don't mean that it's a long cultivar name. It's in the nursery trade as Regal Prince. And there are a number of them that are hybrids between the columnar English oak and Quercus bicolor, which isn't that swamp white oak?
Yep.
And these leaves look more like a regular big oak leaf with deep sinuses and stuff, and very, very beautiful glossy green foliage, but this nice tight columnar growth habit. It's really a beautiful thing in leaf, but nice growth habit in the wintertime as well.
Bicolor is really disease resistant, especially here for the southeast. It has really, you don't get the foliar issues you have on the English oaks. So you get the great shape from the fastigiata, and you get the disease resistance from the bicolor, bicolor. So.
I often see bumper stickers that say WWJD, which stands for What Would JC Do? And we wonder about that when we're standing in front of his fastigiate English oak, whether JC's goal would be to preserve it, or this is just my own personal opinion. I would tend to think that he would look at this Regal Prince and think, yes, this is exactly what I want. I want anything to be taken to the next level. And I think that's what's been accomplished with this hybrid, because you have that same very dramatic and useful growth habit, but in a disease-free tree.
There's another one we have in another part of the garden. It's something spirit, and I can't think. I like
Was that kindred spirit?
Kindred Spirit, and
Yeah.
that's the trade name. I don't remember its real name, but that's one I think it's superior to this one. I think
Okay.
that's my favorite of the hybrids.
This is another very, very rare plant. Almost as rare in American gardens as a European native fruiting plant, medlar. That's the common name. The scientific name for the medlars is Mespilus. And the European one is Mespilus germanica. It's in the rose family, and the European medlar's fruit was, I don't know, maybe about the size of a big walnut, brown skinned, and it's harvested in the fall, but it's not eaten until it has been allowed to blet. Now, unless you've dealt with medlars or been instructed about medlars, you've probably never heard the term blet before, B-L-E-T-T. The fruit, when they're are first harvested, are very hard. They're allowed to sit, just out on the counter in the pantry or someplace like that until they get almost as soft as applesauce. And it is at that point that they're eaten and supposedly are, amazingly delicious. But this tree with the beautiful bark is an American medlar. And it's known only from one, like 22-acre population of them in eastern Arkansas, where there's about 25 existing trees. Like many of the fruiting plants in the, like apples and peaches and pears and cherries, they're difficult to root, so they're grafted. And this is grafted on hawthorn understock. It has a rather showy display of white flowers in the spring. Tim reports that they have a nice fragrance. Have you ever seen fruit on it?
I don't think.
Okay. It might be like so many members of the rose
If I have,
it needs cross-pollination.
If I have, they might have had, I think they had rust if I did see them.
Oh, okay.
That's right. I think I saw them. They had rust.
And so this, I haven't told you its full name. It's in the genus Mespilus. And this sign is fairly mildewed, but it's Mespilus canescens. Canescens referring to silvery hairs. The leaves are sort of have silvery hairs on them. But and doing a little online research about this plant, there are some individuals who think that it's not a Mespilus, but it's a hybrid between the European Mespilus germanica and some unknown American hawthorn, Crataegus. That happening seems a little bit of a stretch to me, but it's, there's always people with alternate ideas. I wonder if these stems.
I've taken really soft cuttings before, never succeeded, but we could try again.
Try with the gel.
That's true, yeah.
Now, is this the intergeneric?
That's the intergeneric, yes.
In the neighborhood of 40 years ago, the number of plants that were intergeneric hybrids were few and far between. And I guess I need to explain intergeneric. We understand, like, if you cross one maple with another maple, well, they're interspecific hybrids. They're hybrids between species in the same genus. But an intergeneric is when you hybridize things in different genera and produce offspring. So this is a hybrid between pyracantha, which is firethorn, and osteomales. And what you come up with is pyracomales. And in these instances, this is when you put the X in front of the genus name, the generic name. So it's a really pretty little leaf. The osteomales parent has a highly divided leaf, and it has the white flowers that you expect on a pyracantha. So for about a week, this huge plant is a froth of white, but it doesn't make any fruit. So it's a pyracantha without the showy fruit display.
It doesn't have prickles either.
It doesn't
or thorns.
have the nasty thorns of a firethorn. But, you know, it's not a plant that most people would ever plant in their gardens because it's so big. It's, you know, 15 feet wide probably and 10 foot tall. And nowadays, there are so many intergeneric hybrids.
Just look at orchids.
Yeah, just look at orchids, because in the orchid world, you have things that are hybrid, not between two genera, but like 3 and 4 and more genera. You know, you have to go back a number of generations to get that many into one offspring. But intergeneric hybrids are not uncommon nowadays.
And dicots are a little more uncommon than they are in monocots, I guess. That might be a way of thinking about it. Because I guess wheat is intergeneric.
Well, I don't know if people are hearing you. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think wheat is thought to have arisen from natural hybrids between 3 different genera. Yes, you know, hybrids sometimes occur in nature too. So, you know, I don't own a TV, so I've never seen any of these programs, but this is a little bit like Survivor. Is that the program where people get voted off the island or something like that? You know, it's sort of the process of deciding what stays and what goes here at Arboretum. So, you know, this might be a plant that goes. And I'll be forever cursed for doing so. Okay. How are we doing?
Let's see here. Oh, it's 2 o'clock. So we still have some time.
Jim and Doc,
Yeah.
before you move on from that last one, what was that last one's name? Was that the Vilmorinii or the one
It's
with
the pyracomales. The pyracomales. And is it Vilmorinii? I think that could be right.
or is that NCXXP1?
No, that one's the new one. That one's the one from Tom Ranny, which we get a kick out of. It's a little thing and it doesn't flower.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's the V one.
People are often surprised to encounter coastal redwoods at the Arboretum and in this area. They're not terribly uncommon, but they do well. This is the Sequoia sempervirens. This is the coastal redwood, which is the very tall, but not quite as huge redwood. The giant sequoia, which is Sequoia dendron giganteum, is the one that gets, you know, so broad of trunk. And that one does not, that species does not thrive here, but Sequoia sempervirens does. And there are, I think 6 plants of Sequoia sempervirens here at the Arboretum. And this would have been something JC planted, so it's gotten quite big in 40 years. I think the birds,
The squirrels
under the
and
bark.
I think go after the bark. Yeah. I think there's some town not that far from here that has great big ones.
There's one in downtown Chapel Hill, and
But
I also
there's a
think
whole
there's-
grove of them somewhere.
I think in Graham.
That might be it.
Yeah, I've looked for them, just from the road and passing through Graham, going from Chapel Hill to 85, but I've never seen them.
This isn't the cultivar, one of the cultivars, Chris. This is just the pure Sequoia sempervirens here.
Yep. I believe it's near Rocky Mountain Wilson that has the oodles of the coast redwood. They have a tour that you can download and go visit all of them.
Oh, that's early for that one. That tends to be late. We're talking about Red Glaglan, camellia here. No, I'm just, that's what Doug and I are talking about as we walk by.
A week from now, a month from now.
Later on, it'll look better.
Why don't we talk about the loblolly?
Sure.
One of the, I guess you could call it iconic plants of the J.C. Rawson Arboretum are the dwarf loblolly pines. Now, in the world of dwarf conifers, a lot of them with great many years get fairly good size, but these plants, these dwarf loblolly pines are about 60 years old. They were grown from seed collected in the 1960s, so before JC's time. And you think of a 10-year-old loblolly pine is already going to be this tall. By 60 years old, they're up close to 100 feet tall. So these are dwarves. They're not tiny little munchkin plants, but they're certainly dwarves. Now, what is a witch's broom? Well, when you travel around, you sometimes notice up in a pine tree this really dense growth on the trees, where instead of the normal branches, they have branched again and again and again, so it looks like a broom. They can occur on deciduous plants as well. Hackberries often have witch's brooms in them. Something I saw very frequently in the Northeast, but less commonly so down here. But certainly just traveling around, you often notice witch's brooms and loblolly pines. They're fairly common. As far as I'm aware, no one's entirely sure what causes witch's brooms, but the seed from those cones produced on the part of the tree with the witch's broom produce these dwarves. So these do not have a cultivar name because each one of them is a seedling. They are, the JC Arboretum dwarf strain or something like that, or dwarf group or something like that. But they're really beautiful trees. They're like big green clouds. And you almost never see them anywhere else because I think all pines are hard to propagate. They're usually, other than seed, they're only propagated by grafting, and even then they're hard to graft. We do have one, well, at least one that is was produced by grafting. It's one called Fat Albert or Little Albert.
Yeah, and it's not one of the ones from here.
It's not from here.
No, it's different.
Okay.
It's from some other person.
Yeah.
In place.
And what when you look at them in the Arboretum, and they're in a number of different locations, you see differences from individual to individual. Some are more dwarf than others.
Some of the most dwarf ones are over in the Loblolly Grove near the trials.
Are those younger?
I don't think. I think they're all the same age.
And some of them, have been transplanted, decades ago. So they're not all of them are in, their original locations. But one of my favorite plants in this part of the Arboretum is the sycamore or plane tree. This is the sycamores are platanus. This is Platanus lindeniana, and it's a Mexican species. You see it hasn't yet shed its leaves. Do you think it's later shedding its leaves this year than usual?
Yeah, probably a little bit.
Yeah.
It just depends.
The leaves have turned brown, but are slowly falling from the tree. And the underside of the leaves is quite pale. Maybe when they're still green, it's almost white on the underside. Now, I often go down Burrow Road picking up trash. And when they're sitting out there, the bright white looks like somebody's throwing a paper towel or some out on the ground. But the trunk is quite white. And, you know, despite its height, I wrote down when it was planted. It was planted in 2000. It was, well, maybe 1999. It was received in 1999. I think it's a 3-gallon plant.
Okay, so it's probably like 23 years old. 24.
Yeah. So it's gotten quite large in its few decades here, but really a beauty. It does have a habit of just dropping limbs, so maybe not something, you know, to put over your picnic table or something like that, but really a beautiful tree in this area.
It, unlike most of the other platanus, even our native platanus occidentalis has issues with foliar diseases. Never seed on this thing. And the only, like I said, what like Doug said, the only thing I see wrong with this tree would make a wonderful tree, but it likes to slough off big branches all of a sudden. But they don't hang up in the tree, so it's always clean. Aside from the foliage, whenever you have the paper towels everywhere. But but it's far superior, I think, than our native. But it's I'd say it's a lot less hardy. I think Doug, you mentioned it was Mexican.
Yeah.
And so it probably won't go much further north than this. I think it's real close to Mexicana, which we've had trouble keeping it above ground. Some years it gets taken to the ground and comes back up, but this one hasn't.
There are only 8 species of platanus, you know, on the whole planet Earth. And Mexico has maybe more than half of those species. Our native one is Platanus occidentalis. The only one that occurs in the US is a species, I'm not going to remember its name, but it's native to California and Mexico. And then there's like 4 or 5 other species native to Mexico. This one is native to southeastern Mexico on the Gulf Coast side. Then there's Tim, you know, from my reading, and I'm not an expert, I'm just, you know, read about this earlier today. This species is very closely related to Platanus mexicana.
And then there's a couple European ones, right? And Eurasian.
There's Orientalis,
yeah,
which is native to southern Europe and going eastward into like Iran and Afghanistan. And the London plane tree is a hybrid between Orientalis and Occidentalis. And I think other than Orientalis, I think Orientalis is the only species that occurs in Europe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And there are a lot of plants named Orientalis that are not from, you know, Asia.
Just means east.
Yeah, east of the known world, you know, from a European perspective.
The Middle East, the Near East.
Yeah. Since it's in bloom today, I thought I'd point out this Mahonia. This is Mahonia napolensis from Nepal. It's a selection Maharaja, and I wonder if it's one of the parents of Kentab.
It might. It has that same type of leaf to me.
I don't know if this is one plant. It could very well be.
I think that is one plant, and then that's is that underway? I think up there. I think the one above it. It's one of the other hybrids. It's an Exmadia above us.
This growth habit reminds me of a chicken that has sort of settled down over its brood. It looks like a broody hen. But the very pendant foliage is very horizontal. What sort of fragrance does it have?
It doesn't have japonica, straight japonica fragrance, which is what I like. But which smells like lily of the valley is what the japonica smells like to me. This I think is spicier. To me, anyways. I mean,
it's sweet, but I don't find it real pleasant. I
Yeah.
love japonica. It's sort of sweet, but sort of like, you know, sort of like a perfume that you wish somebody wasn't wearing.
yeah.
Oh, you know, another early and very significant part of the Arboretum was this planting of conifers. Now, like other collections here at the Arboretum, they've sort of been spread out throughout the Arboretum, but the Arboretum, you know, people had this idea that you didn't grow conifers in the South other than, you know, the native pines and just a few other things. But the Arboretum really trialed a huge number of different conifers and found that there are many conifers that do well in the southeast. You know, there are a lot of conifers that come from warmer climates that tolerate our not so cold winters, and there are a lot of conifers from colder climates that are fairly good in this climate. The Arboretum has a big collection of plum yews, the cephalotaxis. The one that I really like is this one, Mary Fleming.
She's super
It is
tall.
so low. It is so low to the ground. The plum yews prefer shade over sun. And, you know, I always hate to say deer don't eat it, but generally they don't eat plum yews, so they do eat the true yews, taxus. But this one, Cephalotaxis Mary Fleming, is so flat on the ground.
I don't even know if it's knee high.
Yeah.
At the highest point.
They're not hard to root. They just take about 18 months to root. They will fairly quickly make a callus on the cut end of this cutting, but then take another 12 months to actually produce roots. It's one of the many conifers that the Arboretum produced in 2020, but most people didn't buy them. And it's just a beautiful dark green ground cover for shade. Above it is a real interesting Japanese maple. It's one of the pine-barked maples. When you think of a typical Japanese maple has very smooth bark, this bark looks more like an oak bark or something. It's Acer palmatum arakawa. I think this rough bark is a feature that finds favor amongst people making bonsai. Gives a suggestion of greater age. There are a couple of real interesting trees back here. The Arboretum has quite a few different species of Carpinus. We saw a couple of selections of the European Carpinus, which is a common plant, but this is Carpinus kawakamii. It's native to Taiwan and southeastern China. It has really small leaves and like other Carpinus is slow to shed their leaves, but it's a real pretty leaf in the summer.
Get the bark. Not getting the bark. It doesn't want to focus.
And then this little beech species. This is Carpinus hayate. Hayate.
Fagus.
Oh yeah, Fagus. I'm sorry. Beech. Fagus is the genus for beech. It's and the leaves and the buds are very much like other beech, but on a much smaller scale. It's also native to Taiwan, and Fagus hayate is named after a person named with that family name, Hayate. And I noticed that he was the author. Well, presumably the same person was the author of the description of this plant, because
it's appropriate that we planted them next to each other. Yeah, and Mark, I think that's probably one of Mark's collections.
The calicarpus?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can see
It
it on
is.
that label. What's that label say? Is there a number or anything by chance? Okay. It wouldn't surprise me. If that's one of yours. Yeah.
What was the Fagus?
Hayate.
Hayatae. Why don't we talk about
Yumi? Or that? I cut it down. It looked so bad a few years ago.
No, I thought it was dead.
Yeah.
No, I saw this for sale at the State Farmers Market.
I did too.
Yeah. I wonder who's growing it. Well, this is at least the third time on this tour that I said something is very rare. This is a very rare native conifer, conifer being cone-bearing plants. This is the Torreya floridana?
No, taxifolia.
Yeah, Torreya taxifolia. A plant native to the panhandle of Florida and very rare there. It was, taller than me.
It was about 10, 12 feet tall, and it turned yellow and looked like it was dead. Cut it down, and it refleshed from the trunk.
Yeah. Growing in the panhandle of Florida, I might wonder if it wants to be in a sandy soil rather than a clay soil, but it's grown quite well. Isn't this the plant that's used for Taxol?
No, that's actually a taxus for Taxol.
Oh, okay.
And that's one of the brevifolia from the Pacific Northwest is where they originally got it. And I think they've now able to synthesize Taxol. But this is very rare. There's another species of Torreya in California, I think. And then there's the rest of them, I think, are Southeast or East Asian.
And some of those become big too. We looked skyward at the beginning of the tour at the zigzag branching of the Korean mimosa. I just looked up and isn't this absolutely beautiful? This is the golden larch, Pseudolarix. Is it deciduous?
No, amabilis.
Yeah, amabilis or amabilis, meaning pleasant. All those little spurs. And this is a good example that conifers are plants that bear cones, and the majority of them are evergreen, but not all conifers are evergreen. Larch and golden larch, dawn redwood, taxodium, the bald cypress, they are all conifers that are deciduous. But get outside and look at the beautiful architecture of trees in the winter. And just across the path is a magnolia, obviously a deciduous magnolia, and I just really enjoy them in winter. The big fuzzy buds remind me of pussy willows. But also preparing for this tour and realizing how big so many of these hybrid magnolias get, I can understand why there's a lot of focus in the magnolia breeding world on breeding smaller plants that mature at smaller sizes. Because unless you've allowed enough room for a good sized tree, it's hard to place one of these large growing magnolias in a small garden.
This is one of the yellow ones, yellow lantern, and it has American genes as well as Asian. This has a Magnolia acuminata, the cucumber magnolia, which it's all over the eastern United States up into southern Canada, and it gets 80 to 100 feet tall. So,
and why did they use Magnolia acuminata, which gets so big as one of the parents? Because it is the source of the yellow pigment for these yellow flowered hybrids. And this is actually quite a well colored yellow one, isn't it?
It's decent, yeah. It has some pink tones to it as well.
Yeah.
But it has a good color. No, we do not have yellow river magnolia as far as I know. I think that's a species. but I'm not certain.
In the late 1980s, Kim Tripp was a graduate student working under J.C. Ralston, and she was a conifer fanatic. And there are now a lot of gaps in this area, but she planted a lot of conifers with blue needles in this area. And some still remain and others have gone to conifer heaven. And, you know, sort of stepping back one bit, one thing I must say that I've always valued about public gardens is the ability to see how big things get. When you go out and buy something, it's, you know, harmless looking little thing in a 1 gallon or 3 gallon pot, and you really need to know how big it's going to get. And down here are 2 selections of Arizona cypress, Cupressus arizonica. Blue ice is the one on the left, and Carolina sapphire is the next one. And they're readily available in the nursery trade, and when they're younger, they're full from the ground up, but eventually they're, what's that, a 40-foot tall tree or more?
Something like that.
Yeah.
My favorite here is this one right here. A local plantsman that you know, if I mentioned their name, said they were only got to 2 feet tall, and I laughed because I said we had one that was a little bit bigger than that, and maybe 2 feet wide, 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide. So this is Juniperus chinensis. Echinode, I can't see it with my, I can't spit it out because I can't read it. I'm too far away from it. But I just love that one. It's about 5 feet tall or so, maybe a little bit bigger than that, and about 8 feet wide, maybe more, at least maybe 10 feet wide. Yeah. So the plants don't read what they're supposed to do.
Well, and often when people are telling you they get 2 feet by 2 feet, they might be indicating that's how big they get in 10 years, but give them 40 years. Well, let's see, late 80s, that's about 40 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God, where have the years gone? But yeah, you know, given enough time, a lot of things get a whole lot bigger than they do in their first 10 years. I really like this spruce here.
Yeah, is that
the way it grows?
Is it bicolor? Yeah, bicolor.
Yeah, the way it grows with the upright branches, you see the blue underside of the needles. The upper part of the needles are green, so you get this two-tone effect. It's Picea bicolor. Cultivar is prostrata, obviously meaning prostrate, and you know, maybe 40 years ago it was more prostrate than that. But even, you know, super slow
Tansu
get big in time. You know, you often see Tansu, you know, about this size in the garden center, and you think it's gonna, you know, not get much bigger, but I'm just shy of 6 feet, and you see this is at least 7 or 8 feet tall.
And I remember that I started 15 years ago the other day here at the Arboretum, and I'm guessing that was maybe 3 feet tall then. So,
yeah. So it's definitely a dwarf conifer, because in 40 years, a regular Cryptomeria japonica
would be 80 or 100.
Yes, yeah, something approaching that. One thing to look out for, I often see on the dwarf forms of Cryptomeria japonica, you'll have some branches that are growing very rapidly and look more normal. Well, they often will revert to full size. You need to cut them out before they swamp the rest of the plant.
This one has one, and I have to repeatedly take these out.
Oh, I see up top. Yeah, you see how different that is exhibiting the normal growth habit.
It's contorted. Actually, it could be cool to propagate sometime, but it's not the congested growth that you get on the cultivar Tansu.
Yeah. Oh yeah, look how it spirals there. Yeah. Let me put it down. Preparing for these tours, I often see something I haven't ever seen before. And this is another spruce. This is Picea martinezii, the Martinez spruce. It's another Mexican native and quite rare in the wild in Mexico, but thriving here at the Arboretum in other parts of the world, like at Wisley and Kew in England. I think it's also a fairly handsome spruce. It's not too aggressively spiny, and the growth habit is fairly graceful. We're not seeing the best aspect of it from where we're standing, but yeah, we'll go to the other side.
Tim and Doug, is that
Yes.
Picea martinezii or something like that?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Martinez pine from north central Mexico. I'd love to. It'd be one to maybe see if we could get seed of and grow a bunch more for distribution. It's a pretty thing.
To me, it's reminiscent of Norway spruce, but growing up in eastern western Pennsylvania in the eastern United States, you see them everywhere, but they aren't as happy as down here. There's one right here. This is a dwarf Abies or Picea Abies right there, but
Norway spruce always looks so depressed. They
when they get old, yeah.
arching branches, and then they have all the stuff drooping down.
This looks like a young one to me when they're in their prime.
And I mentioned the one vegetatively propagated dwarf loblolly pine. This is it right here. That's Little Albert, very dense growing one. But,
It's really grown.
I guess somebody propagated it by grafting. Maybe we can see the grafting.
Yeah, you can see that. I think you can. It has a high graft right here. It was grafted somewhere in here.
Oh wow, that high.
I think, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's more noticeable here. That looks like grafting,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
It used to be. It looked like a little standard. It's really grown because I've cleaned this out a couple times.
Oh, well, it's 2:30. Oh, look at the adorable little cones here. I don't know if you all have ever seen the cones on hemlocks, but they're tiny. And today, since it's been damp, they've closed back up. But the cones on hemlocks are really cute. And this is a southern Japanese species, Pinus sieboldii.
It's either that or Chinenses. I don't know which.
Tsuga sieboldii.
Yeah, these cones are really reminiscent of our native eastern hemlock, which if you aren't common here, but you can go to Hemlock Bluff and see them. But they're my former state, Pennsylvania's state tree. So yeah, this is kind of takes me home. The foliage looks a little different though. It's a little more irregular to me on how it's arranged on the twigs, and more rounded. And eastern hemlock is a little more flat held. The needles are all more in the same plane.
Yeah. These are almost arranged in like a bottle brush.
Yeah.
Where they're heading in all sorts of directions.
But this will grow here, and and it doesn't get Hemlock lowly adelgid.
Chris, it's 2:30.
I was going to say it is 2:30, so it's probably a really good time to stop. But this is also a good time for some questions. You got a moment or two, Doug and Tim, for some questions?
Sure.
Okay. Before we do take some questions from everyone in the audience, I thought it'd be a nice time to remind everyone that if you would like to save the chat, you can click on the icon that has the 3 dots that are horizontal right there in the chat window. And that way you can save all the botanical names that I type throughout the program as reminders throughout the program. So go ahead and just do the save chat by clicking on 3 dots. And if you have a question for Doug and Tim, go ahead and unmute yourself and we'll do our best to answer them. Oh, we do have a special request as we're taking questions, Doug and Tim. Bobby Wilder would like to know if you can just do a quick walk over to the new road system around the Great Lawn.
Sure. We can do that. We'll work our way over there. Hopefully I don't make anybody sick.
So we have no questions from everyone in the audience?
What criteria? Okay, what criteria do you look at before deciding to remove a plant, Doug?
Well, why don't we walk and talk? Oh, is this starting to?
Yep, it was flowering a little before Christmas.
Yeah. You know, they're we'll walking, and then I can finish.
We're gonna get to our destination, and Doug will get back to that question about how to decide what to remove.
Jan just commented in the chat that the tour was a wonderful way to start the new year.
Thank you. Show them our pile of dirt.
Not from that angle.
Okay. Well, the overall focus of the Arboretum is to grow plants for the purpose of evaluating them. And so, you know, do they do well in this area? If they don't do well, that's a reason to get rid of them. If they do well and have desirable characteristics, like they're ornamental or edible or whatever, well, then to distribute them. So if something has proven to be worthwhile to grow in this area, and the Arboretum has successfully seen to it entering the nursery trade, and you can buy it just everywhere, well, then it no longer needs to be in the Arboretum collection if you can buy it anywhere and see it anywhere. You know, there are plants that grow really well here, but probably would never be of interest to the home gardener or the landscaper. So maybe they go away. You know, anytime a plant leaves the Arboretum, it's space for something new to get planted. We're only 10.5 acres or something like that. So space is always a prime consideration. You know, we saw part of an older collection of crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtles, there's so much breeding work going on with crepe myrtles that these older selections are probably inferior to the newer selections. So they might go away. Arboretum's focus has never been to be, you know, a complete collection of anything or a place to preserve things for of all time. So, and you know, there's other issues too, like invasiveness. Something might be drop dead gorgeous, you know, easy to grow, but it might also be the kind of thing that has the potential to be an invasive exotic. We don't need any more invasive exotics. So those are some of the issues.
Any other questions?
I don't see flowers on the Magnolia Maudier yet.
Well, it looks like it's kind of a related one. Let's see if there's any difference in it. Does the Arboretum have a specific procedure for taking plants out, like a checklist explaining why a specimen was cut down?
I would say no.
No.
Lot of different reasons, right?
Yeah. Okay, what was the difference between the two laniceras we mentioned earlier? Okay, there were two different ones. There was Lanicera fragrantissima and Lanicera X purpussii winter beauty. X purpussii or purpussii, the X just meaning that it's a hybrid, is a cross between fragrantissima and another species called Lanicera standicii. it looks so much like Fragrantissima.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how we used to have just the straight Purpussii, and it looked just like Winter Beauty. So I don't know. I mean, they're really similar, but it has a little bit of different genes there. Standicii,
Supposedly.
yeah, it's a supposed hybrid. Standicii, which we have in another part of the garden, has the form we have anyways, has longer, more willowy leaves. It's darker green. It's a little more open. The flowers are often pink tinted. Fragrantissima tends to be pure white. And to me, Winter Beauty has been more white. And the leaf shape is similar to, on Purpussii is the same as, really similar to Fragrantissima. Any other questions?
Not looking like it. Rather question free today, which is a little surprising, which is great.
We had a few during the walk itself, so. Is this a good enough view for Bobby, or should we walk the rest of it?
Well, you can walk the rest of it if you have anything else to say. It is a good view though.
Yeah, you can see here.
I noticed you had a nice pond developing near the big pile of dirt.
There's not a pond today. There was the other day though. Yeah, here's the pile of dirt. You're probably seeing a pile of permatil or something.
I thought that was water at the bottom of it. Sorry.
Yesterday, there was actually water running down through here. So it's dried up a little bit. But we'll walk some of the pathway over to the main perennial border.
The path does look nice.
Now that we're about done, the sky's starting to break up and there's a little bit of blue showing finally.
Oh, I do see a little bit of blue, but no shadows yet.
At one point, we actually had a few sprinkles too. So.
Oh, did you? Well, thank you for putting up with those.
You could count them. So. Okay.
I guess that's one benefit for doing the tours remotely from inside of our own homes. We don't have to be out there in the cold, wet weather like you two are. So thank you very much for doing that.
We'll show you something really quickly here. Does anybody see what's different here?
I do.
Let's see, what day was it? That was the 17th, I think, of December. The last day I worked prior to this week. The students helped cut down the two hollies on either side of the White Garden entrance. So we're opening that up. There's a plan that may come to fruition, hopefully in the relatively near future. Yeah,
It should happen soon.
okay, so yeah, there's a plan for an arbor that'll be here at the entrance. So we started by taking down some of the big old, Nellie R. Stevens holly. So it was a big change that happened all in one morning and afternoon.
All done with battery-powered chainsaw and pole pruner, which was made possible by a very generous donation by an Arboretum member.
And volunteer.
And volunteer. Yes, she's also a volunteer. One of a number of very generous donations this year to purchase tools for the maintenance of the Arboretum.
Okay, my battery is saying I am down to 15%. So, if no one else has any questions.
We're good to go. Thank you so much, Tim and Doug, and thank you to everyone else for joining us today. Hope we'll see you again in February for the next tour.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.